The story of Tambadathika is a tale of transformation and redemption. Tambadathika served as the king's executioner for 55 years. He had just retired from his grim duties. One day he prepared rice gruel at home and went to the river for a bath. Upon returning, he saw Thera Sariputta standing at his door for alms food. Tambadathika decided to offer his specially prepared rice gruel to the Thera. After the meal, Thera Sariputta taught him the Dhamma. Tambadathika was initially agitated, recalling his past life as an executioner. The Thera asked if he killed by choice or by order of the king. Tambadathika realized he was not guilty as he had no wish to kill. Calmed by this realization, Tambadathika listened attentively to the Dhamma. He came very close to attaining Sotapatimagga. Sadly, on his way home, he was gored to death by a demon disguised as a cow. The Buddha revealed that Tambadathika was reborn in the Tusita Deva world. The Buddha emphasized that even a single word of sense can produce great benefit. This story teaches us the power of understanding and redemption. This is the story of Bahiyadaruciriya, a man who survived a shipwreck and sought enlightenment. A group of merchants went out to sea. Their boat was wrecked, and only one survived. The survivor, naked and desperate, tied a plank to his body. He sat where people could see him, and they gave him food. Mahabrahma, a friend from a past life, saw Bahiyadaruciriya going astray. He told him he was not an arahat and directed him to the Buddha. Distressed, Bahiyadaruciriya ran to Savatthi. Mahabrahma helped him cover the distance in one night. Bahiyadaruciriya pleaded with the Buddha for teachings. The Buddha instructed him to be conscious of just the present moment. Bahiyadaruciriya attained arahatship but was later killed by a cow. The Buddha declared him the fastest to attain enlightenment. This is the story of Theri Kundalakesi. She was a remarkable woman from Rajagaha. Kundalakesi was the daughter of a wealthy man. She lived a very sheltered life. One day she saw a thief being led to his execution. She fell in love with him instantly. Her parents paid for his freedom, and they got married. However, the thief only wanted her jewels. He led her to a mountain intending to kill her. She pushed him off a cliff to save herself. After this, Kundalakesi left her home and her jewels. She joined a group of female wandering ascetics, the Paribhajikas. She quickly mastered their teachings. Kundalakesi traveled, challenging others to answer her questions. She met Thera Sariputta, who answered all her questions. He asked her one question she couldn't answer. She became a bhikkhuni and soon attained enlightenment. The Buddha praised her, saying conquering oneself is the greatest victory. Once upon a time, at the Jetavana monastery, the Buddha met a Brahmin named Anatthapucchaka. Anatthapucchaka approached the Buddha with a question. He said, "Venerable sir, do you only know beneficial practices?" The Buddha replied, "I also know the practices that are harmful." He then listed 6 harmful practices. These practices are sleeping until sunrise, habitual idleness, cruelty, indulgence in intoxicants, wandering alone at night, and sexual misconduct. The Buddha then asked how the Brahmin earned his living. Anatthapucchaka said he gambled. The Buddha replied, "Winning at dice is nothing compared to conquering oneself." This is the story of Thera Sariputta's uncle, a Brahmin. The Brahmin made offerings worth 1,000 kahapanas every month. He gave these offerings to the Nagantha ascetics. He hoped to reach the Brahma world in his next life. Thera Sariputta asked his uncle about his meritorious deeds. He explained that the Nagantha ascetics had given him false hopes. They did not know the way to the Brahma world. He then took his uncle to the Buddha. The Buddha told the Brahmin that a spoonful of alms food to a bhikkhu was better. It was better than 1,000 kahapanas given to the Nagantha ascetics. The Buddha recited a verse to explain this. He said that paying homage to a bhikkhu for a moment was better than 100 years of offerings. The Brahmin attained Sotapatti fruition after hearing the Buddha's words. This is the story of Thera Sariputta's nephew. It took place at the Veluvana monastery. Thera Sariputta asked his nephew if he was doing any meritorious deeds. The nephew, a Brahmin, said he was sacrificing a goat in fire worship every month. He hoped to reach the Brahma world in his next life. Sariputta explained that his teachers had given him false hopes. They did not know the way to the Brahma world. He then took his nephew to the Buddha. The Buddha taught the young Brahmin the true Dhamma. He said, "Paying homage to a bhikkhu for a moment is better than 100 years of fire worship." The Buddha spoke in verse to emphasize this. At the end, the nephew attained Sotapatti fruition. This story highlights the power of true devotion. This is the story of Thera Sariputta's friend, a Brahmin. One day, Thera Sariputta asked his friend if he was doing any meritorious deeds. The Brahmin replied that he had been making large sacrificial offerings. He hoped to reach the Brahma world in his next life. Sariputta told him that his teachers had given him false hopes. They did not know the way to the Brahma world. Sariputta took his friend to the Buddha. The Buddha showed him the true way to the Brahma world. The Buddha said, "Worshipping the noble ones for a moment is better than making sacrificial offerings all year." The Brahmin then attained Sotapadhi fruition. This is the story of Ayuvaddhanakumara. It begins with two hermits practicing religious austerities for 48 years. One hermit left to marry and had a son. When the family visited the old hermit, he blessed the parents but not the child. He predicted the child would die in 7 days. The hermit suggested seeking the Buddha's help. The parents took the child to the Buddha. The Buddha also predicted the child's death. He advised building a pavilion and placing the child there. Bhikkhus were to recite protective paritas for 7 days. On the 7th day, the Buddha and powerful devas arrived. The ogre waiting to take the child was forced to retreat. The child was protected by the continuous recitation. The child survived and was named Ayuvaddhana. He lived to be 120 years old. The Buddha taught that respecting elders brings longevity, beauty, happiness, and strength. Ayuvaddhana and his companions attained spiritual fruition. This is the story of Samanera Samkicca, a young monk who showed immense courage and wisdom. 30 bhikkhus took meditation subjects from the Buddha and traveled to a village far from Savatthi. 500 robbers demanded a bhikkhu for sacrifice to the forest spirits. Each bhikkhu volunteered. Samanera Samkicca, only 7 years old but an arahat, insisted on going with the robbers. The robbers' leader struck at Samkicca, but the sword curled up without harming him. The leader tried again, but the blade bent upwards. Amazed and repentant, the robbers asked to become bhikkhus. Samkicca agreed, and they all returned to the village monastery. The Buddha praised virtuous living, and the 500 robbers attained arahatship. This is the story of Khanu-Kondanna, a revered monk during the time of the Buddha. Kondanna took a meditation subject from the Buddha and went into the jungle. There he attained arahatship. On his way back to the Buddha, Kondanna rested on a stone slab, deep in jhana concentration. 500 robbers, mistaking him for a tree stump, placed their loot around him. At dawn, they realized he was a living being and fled in fear. Kondanna revealed he was a bhikkhu, not an ogre, calming the robbers. Awed by his words, they sought his forgiveness and requested to join the order. Kondanna and the new bhikkhus went to the Buddha, who said, "A day in the life of a wise man is more worthwhile than 100 years of ignorance." This is the story of Thera Sappadasa, a bhikkhu at Jetavana Monastery. Thera Sappadasa was unhappy with his life as a bhikkhu. He felt returning to a householder's life would be humiliating. He decided it was better to die. Once he put his hand into a pot with a snake, but it did not bite him. The snake was his slave in a past life. Another time he took a razor to cut his throat. As he placed the razor, he reflected on his pure moral practice. His body filled with satisfaction and bliss. Detaching from bliss, he focused on insight knowledge. He soon attained arahatship and returned to the monastery. Other bhikkhus asked about his knife. He explained he cut off moral defilements with insight knowledge. The bhikkhus doubted him and asked the Buddha. The Buddha confirmed it was possible to attain arahatship instantly. He then spoke, "Better than 100 years of idleness is 1 day of zealous effort." This is the story of Theri Patacara, a woman of great beauty and tragic fate. Patacara was the daughter of a rich man from Savatthi. She eloped with a young male attendant and lived as a poor man's wife. While pregnant, she tried to return to her parents. Her husband followed her. She gave birth in the bushes on the way. Pregnant again, she set out for her parents. Her husband died from a snake bite while preparing a place for her to give birth. She lost both sons to a hawk and the river. She then learned her entire family had died in a storm. Mad with grief, she met the Buddha. He comforted her, and she attained Sotapadhi fruition. Later, she became a bhikkhuni and attained arahatship. This is the story of Kisagotami, a woman from Savatthi. She was known for her slim body and married a rich young man. Kisagotami had a son who tragically died as a toddler. Stricken with grief, she carried his body, seeking medicine to bring him back to life. People thought she had gone mad. A wise man advised her to seek the Buddha. The Buddha told her to find mustard seeds from a house where no one had died. She went from house to house but found no such place. She realized death comes to all families. Her perspective changed. She left her son's body in the jungle and returned to the Buddha. She understood the impermanence of life and became a bhikkhuni. One day, while lighting lamps, she saw the flames flare up and die out. She meditated on this and attained arahatship. The Buddha taught that perceiving the deathless is better than living 100 years without it. This is the story of Theri Bahuputtika, a mother of many children. Once in Savatthi, there lived a couple with 7 sons and 7 daughters. All the children got married, and the family thrived. After the father died, the mother kept all the property. The children wanted their inheritance and convinced her to divide it. She went to stay with each child, but none treated her well. Each complained and refused to keep her for long. Hurt and bitter, she left her family and became a bhikkhuni. She realized she must make the most of her remaining life. The Buddha appeared before her and taught, "A life without practicing the Dhamma is useless, even if it lasts 100 years.